Taylor, you might have to unmute yourself.
Yep.
There you go. All right. So, hey everybody, welcome to an introduction to Ethereum presented by Taylor Gerring. It's speaking to us from Florida. He just got back from Switzerland. We're really lucky to get him. He's been traveling all over the world here recently. There's a lot of cool Bitcoin companies in Atlanta, and now we've got a surge of Bitcoin meetups here. This is kind of a collaborative event. Taylor, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So there's the Bitcoin Atlanta group, and two groups: the Atlanta blockchain, which Michael's helping running, and an Ethereum focused one by Shamar. Oh yeah, you're right there. And you're gonna have yours up north, right?
Yeah, we're going to be doing ours in Roswell, and the GM's Roswell location. So we've got access now.
Oh. Now we can.
All right, now we can.
Capital Grill as well. That's for businesses that are interested in taking Bitcoin to more application-based technologies. So they'll be able to Capital Grill.
Cool. Okay. Great. So we're gonna do like a 20 to 30-minute talk from Taylor, and then we're gonna have lots of Q&A time. Michael went for talk.
If Taylor's on a roll, you might let him go longer than 30 minutes. It depends how well he's doing. We'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, Atlanta blockchain, we're just focused on education, having these meetup groups supply food and drinks. Pareto is actually our sponsor. Just want to give a shout out to them. They're focused on consulting work. Get with Kenny if you're interested in a job. Kenny is in the back, and the probably the best well-dressed here. So the bestest well-dressed. All right, so thank you. Give them a hand for the sponsor. And like I said, this is a joint meetup between Bitcoin Atlanta, the Tab Group, the Atlanta Blockchain, and Ethereum enthusiasts, which Shamari is running. So this is probably the most exciting space, and that's why we're all hosting this event for you all night. With no further ado, we'll give it up to Taylor and have your questions for him, because we're going to nail him with all kinds of hard questions after he's done talking.
I think I left out your title, but he's the Director of Technology. Is that right?
Yeah, the Director of Technology at Ethereum.
Yeah. Maybe you can give a little more background about yourself too. All right. That's a bust.
All right, Taylor, we're gonna hand it off to you.
Okay. You guys can hear me all right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for coming. It's cool to see like a few different meetups come together and put on a little bit larger event, and we can like talk about decentralization and blockchains in general. Just since I'm not there, how many people are roughly there are we looking at?
We got people on the banisters.
Yeah.
Awesome. Nice. Can I get a show of hands of how many people know about Bitcoin and generally understand what Bitcoin is? Okay. And the same if you know about Ethereum and how Ethereum works and it's different from Bitcoin. Okay, cool. Just so I have a rough idea. So let me talk a little bit about who I am and a little bit of my background in this space. I kind of got into the whole Bitcoin thing around 2012, and in 2013 bought my first Bitcoin around $10. $30. I think I bought 10 of them, and I was like really freaking out about $300 with Bitcoin, and it was pretty crazy back then, I thought. So I spent about a year in the space, very interested in a lot of aspects, of course, going down the speculative route and a few others, but I ended up working on a multi-token wallet called Hive. And that had Bitcoin and Litecoin, and we had aspirations to add lots and lots of other tokens to it. But we kind of ran into some issues developing it, and part of those were due to kind of how Bitcoin was and some of the limitations of the decentralization protocols available at the time. So after a while working on that, I kind of fell into Ethereum. I got in touch with Vitalik over Instant Messenger and started talking with him and kind of getting an understanding of what I could do to help out Ethereum because I was really excited about this idea of blockchains that can be used beyond token. So I've been working with Ethereum since December 2013, about 2.5 years now, about as long as the whole project's been running. And I've helped them run stuff in Switzerland and Berlin and London and Amsterdam. And I'm trying to do a lot more of education and adoption now after having helped the project out on a few other areas. So yeah, I'm kind of working as the director of technology, taking care of the web servers and setting some guidance for like where we're going and translating some of what the developers say into human speak. But I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit today about decentralization in general. And I have some slides that I'll go through, and I'll kind of skip over some of the dense stuff. But let me get my screen share going. So can you see that all right? Yeah? Yeah. Cool. So I'm just going to talk to you about Blockchains 101, decentralization for everyone. I think it's really important that we take a step back of like the tokens or smart contracts or whatever blockchains are offering and understand all the implications for us as humans on Earth in a large society in that general sense. So first, I'm just going to kind of go over Bitcoin real briefly, and then I'll kind of move forward a little bit. So if you are listening, hopefully you know this thing called Bitcoin exists, and this guy Satoshi invented it, so to speak. And this happened quite a few years back, and it was actually launched back in 2009. And here we see kind of highlighted in yellow, embedded in the Genesis block, the first block, the message from the Times with the date there, and says Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. So you can kind of understand where Satoshi was coming from when the whole Bitcoin thing was introduced.
Hey, I think we're only seeing the first slide.
Sorry?
Okay, there. Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Sorry about that. Let's see if we can.
We're seeing the preview.
You seen Prelude? Okay. So this was the previous slide, the Genesis block slide. Okay. So Prelude. So just kind of want to highlight that Bitcoin is a collection of technologies built on existing knowledge and understanding, and then kind of an additional component was added, I think, that allowed us to have this whole new blockchain thing. And I kind of described this in an analogy with a car. Just because you got a bunch of metal and rubber and the different car pieces together, unless you assemble them in that specific way that makes it a vehicle, then it's kind of just pieces and parts. So looking back, we have a lot of things that we're building on top of databases and some of the variants, cryptography, and peer-to-peer networks. And these kind of form the basis of what enables Bitcoin or peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And that's what actually Satoshi called it in his white paper. And I have a little picture here from the white paper. And he actually doesn't call it blockchain at all ever in here. He refers to it as a chain of blocks, which we now see as kind of this immutable Merkle data tree structure. And this is something that's kind of like gaining a lot of value, I think, with people who are involved with accounting or tracking of goods or anything of that nature. Regulators certainly are interested in this. It also has the properties of being censorship resistant because it's P2P based communication. If anybody's used BitTorrent or some of the older protocols, these are really hard to shut down, especially once BitTorrent kind of took off. The protocol used underneath that is especially resistant to being shut down by any central server being turned off. In general, it solved the problem of coordination. And in this way, the protocol governs the compliance. And the way I look at it is kind of, we're delegating the trust aspect to the protocol and saying, look, we agree the protocol can do this, so we're going to trust it to do that, and it can handle that coordination aspect. And that's kind of where I see blockchains today excelling. So, after much discussion, Satoshi kind of wrote, governments are good at cutting off the heads of centrally controlled networks like Napster, but pure P2P networks like Nutella and Tor seem to be holding their own. And that's kind of what I was alluding to is, once we get this sufficient level of decentralization, nothing can really stop them. And that's what's really going to be important. So, it's now 2016. We've had Bitcoin for almost 8 years now. We've got another halving coming up soon. but it's not the only one in town, right? We have some other tokens that have been out for a while. Litecoin is well known. It was experimented with a lower block time, 2.5 minutes. Dogecoin came around the scene as being this really fun, exciting coin to have and just do cool things with, and it wasn't about the value of the token so much. And then we have something like Darkcoin came out, which was focusing more on the privacy aspect. So already just within a few years after Bitcoin had been out and gained some value, and people started experimenting with other technologies, we saw, we can actually use this blockchain technology for not just value transfer, but innovation in all kinds of industries. So what Vitalik Buterin kind of noticed after spending a long time with this is that you could generalize what Bitcoin does and what blockchain does and turn it into a state transition machine and use that as a basis for a dApp platform. And this is kind of what Ethereum is really striving to do right now, is be a platform for programming blockchain applications and smart contracts. So this is, of course, expanded a little bit more beyond just the initial coins and tokens. Right now we have Bitcoin is a primary value transfer mechanism. Dash is another one that Darkcoin evolved into, and I think is doing some really interesting things with governance that I'm particularly interested in introducing to Ethereum. Obviously, Ethereum has kind of got the logic processing space right now. It's being kind of explained as a world computer, and the analogy is very easy to grip for a lot of reasons. But the blockchain component specifically, the EVM, the virtual machine, that is responsible for the CPU effectively in our computers. But unlike the CPU, where you can't verify the output because it runs independently on each machine, the virtual machine in Ethereum is cryptographically secured, so we can actually trust the output of that. We can verify the output was executed in the right way, and then using cryptography, trust that it won't be changed. And I think this is a really impactful idea. But we have expansion beyond just blockchain purely in that sense. Of course, IPFS is gaining a lot of popularity and has some really cool ideas about how to re-decentralize the storage of the web. MadeSafe and Storage are also working on storage projects. BigChainDB is working on kind of blockchain-esque massive record storage on top of traditional database systems. And we even had some projects experimenting with messaging in the form of BitMessage, which is more or less dead kind of with Namecoin. They haven't seen a whole lot of activity. So I'll pause real quick to see if there are any questions so far. Okay.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Oh, what was BDB doing again? What was that?
BigChainDB?
Yeah, can you go over that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I talked with them briefly, and so they basically approached blockchain from a completely different perspective and said, all right, well, if you want some sort of consortium or federated network where it's not running in a public space, could you use a more traditional system? I think it's called ReactDB. And this has support already built in for this kind of sharding notion where not every node needs to store all of the data. This is kind of a traditional throwback to traditional relational database systems, which I had on an earlier slide, normal SQL systems that were invented in kind of expanded in the 70s and 80s. So they took this existing kind of normal SQL system or key value system and decided to build blockchain logic on top of that as logical components. It's an interesting twist because it contains the same basic core pieces of blockchain, but it itself is not blockchain in the traditional sense that Satoshi might consider it, or what we might call a Satoshi blockchain. So I'm interested to see what kind of stuff they work on and what kind of projects and clients they work with. But it's definitely a whole different beast. It approaches blockchains from a completely different angle.
Did anyone else have questions at this time?
I want to ask about Hyperledger, where we may see Hyperledger on.
The question was where do we see Hyperledger fall into all this? And if you could maybe go over that a little bit.
Yeah, why don't we save the Hyperledger question for after the slides? We can talk about that one.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else? Okay. All right, we're good.
Cool. All right. So, we've talked about a bunch of different projects, where Bitcoin was kind of born from and what's kind of happened since Bitcoin leading up into, let's say, 2014 or so. And we find out that actually crypto is good for more than just buying things on the Silk Road. So we can build lots of cool systems with it. And why is that? Well, there's a common thing that most of these blockchain systems have in common, and that's that they are immutable, right? So in a normal database, you have create, read, update, delete. These are your 4 traditional operations known as CRUD. But in blockchain world, we have no update or delete. We just have create and read. So it's append only. This immutable aspect's really, really interesting because that means not even a database administrator or the owner of the hardware the database is running on can actually go back and alter any records. Also, we have non-repudiability. So using digital signatures, we can basically say, all right, well, the person in control of this key, we can prove that they transacted this. We can also do signing and verification methods for getting around passwords. We don't have to actually implement passwords anymore. We can do challenge responses with crypto keys. And then also, due to the P2P aspect, it's fault tolerant. So that means it's censorship resistant. It's very hard for people to stop you from publishing what you want. And you also get these really nice properties of partially connected mesh resilience. So I like to think of it as if you had to maintain a traditional database system, maintaining 2 full-time servers is like kind of hard and expensive to keep them online 100% of the time. But if you actually had a dozen nodes and they could go down and reconnect and resync automatically, it would be much easier to allow half or 3/4 of those to go offline, as long as you keep 1 copy. So there are lots of other implications for mesh technology. We see in low-cost areas like Africa, we see in microtransactions, like metering Wi-Fi and so forth. So, and then I have a pretty dense slide here on benefits, and I go into detail a little bit more, some of what the benefits are of blockchains. I'll talk about zero infrastructure. I think this is a really strong sell for IT administrators or DevOps people. Developers not having to spin up a server and worry about production is really cool. BitTorrent scales automatically, and that's what we'd expect to see in a P2P environment. You have just different jurisdictions, so you're not governed by where the server physically runs. You could have their governance in a different location if you wanted, or it can run everywhere and nowhere, depending on how you want to classify it. You can have identity built in due to the PGP key, the crypto keys, operating similarly to PGP, even though it never really had the uptake. Blockchains are also highly auditable with triple entry accounting. I have a note there that it's if desired, because projects are working on basically obscuring the information. So, that's fine if that's something you want, but if you want highly auditable nature, then blockchains can also provide that. Censorship resistance, as I mentioned. And I think a big thing that a lot of people underestimate is the machine-to-machine transactions. So we're all used to consumer, business to consumer, and whatnot. But as we've seen, especially recently with the proliferation of bots and AI, I think machine-to-machine transactions are going to become especially important. And this is an area where basically Bitcoin was the first mover and innovated in allowing the transfer of value in this automatic way online. So I think that autonomous agents, bots, IoT devices are all going to start leveraging this hugely in the future. And of course, there are a few caveats. Not everything is perfect. Right now, there's no external data to the blockchain world, so you kind of have to feed data in through oracles. There's no privacy per se. Everything is published on blockchain. So if you want to hide something, you need to use something, an external encryption scheme, or maybe eventually we'll have zero knowledge proofs, or perhaps homomorphic encryption. And lastly is scalability, right? So this is the big trouble that Bitcoin's kind of facing right now, and Ethereum will be facing very soon, is how do we increase the transactions per second, and how do we decrease the time to finality? And that's kind of the whole waiting for 6 blocks thing. So we want transactions really, really fast, and we want them to scale up with efficiency really, really high. but these problems are still under research, and the theory is being developed, excuse me, on how to solve some of this stuff. So real quick, I'll just touch on public, private, and consortium chains. We know what public chains are. It's what runs in the Bitcoin world and the Ethereum world. Consortium chains are secured by a subset of known entities. I kind of like that word better than private chains, because private doesn't really describe exactly what the properties of that blockchain are, right? Is it privacy of the data? What does it mean for fungibility of the data? Is the data transportable? Does it mean the participants are exclusive? I think the word kind of came about as the anti-public is the antonym, but it doesn't really mean anything in and of itself. You can certainly run a private chain of anything you want, but when corporations ask for private chains, I ask them to be a little more precise in what it is that they're interested in being private specifically. So this is kind of how I see the whole decentralization space and some of the opportunities for developers and other people interested in, how can I use this blockchain as a coordination mechanism? If you understand these kind of basics of blockchain, then you can use it more effectively and provide value for your customers or gain efficiency in your back end. There's a lot of information, and I think we kind of get inundated a little bit, and I feel like this guy sometimes. I want some more information. I feel kind of like I have no idea what's going on. So I'm going to give you a little bit more details and then show you some pretty pictures about the ecosystem if you haven't seen them or haven't been around Ethereum very often. So as I mentioned, Ethereum virtual machine, it's now implemented in 8 languages. Bitcoin was originally written in C++, and that kind of sets the standard for the actual protocol. And there are a few extra clients written in Java and Go, I believe. But right now, Ethereum, we have 8, including JavaScript and Java, Rust, Ruby, C++, Python, and there's some support coming in .NET. There's a JSON RPC that controls it, just like Bitcoin. It's a little different in the kinds of commands that it accepts, but it allows the same type of functionality where you can automate processes with it, build extra applications on top. And it's transport agnostic, so you can interact it with just HTTP locally, or there's an inter-process communication if you're using it with a graphical client or something like that. And finally, there's a web3.js JavaScript library where most of the functionality for making it easy to build on blockchains is baked in. You don't need to do anything with complicated crypto math or doing any special things with key derivation. If you're not into crypto, that's okay. I think it's okay that we can build these things on blockchains and not necessarily be crypto experts. I think in one way that's what Ethereum's trying to do, is make it easy for the average developer to use a very straightforward API, and you get decentralization and you get privacy. And this is a huge boost forward over what it's like to develop for Bitcoin, which has improved, but it has its rough edges. So this is what Ethereum looks like right now. These are 3 different applications. The top one is the Geth console. This is the first application that was launched to interact with contracts. You can see there, hopefully, if the text is coming through and not too small, you just need a sprinkling of some JavaScript and you can interact with things. This is definitely a way for developers to play with it, but not obviously the end result for users. At the bottom is the wallet, what it looks like right now. And this is kind of what we imagine as like a dApp browser, what a blockchain could look like or a decentralized app could look like when presented to an end user, and make it as friendly as an app on your phone or an app on your desktop. So that's kind of the vision that we're working towards now. It's part of the Mist GUI. And then over on the right-hand side is our Mix IDE that stands for Integrated Development Environment for those of you who are not developers. And this allows for developers to kind of fine-tune program code and fine-tune it. These might kind of be merged in the future so that the applications kind of do similar functionality because there's a large space of users to cover, I think, in terms of exposing blockchains and smart contracts to them. So just a couple of other numbers. The network on Ethereum has been live now for more than 8 months. There's about 200 dApps already listed on dapps.ethercast.com. We have around inching up to a half a transaction per second on our test net when we were building Ethereum and testing it, we reached over 20 transactions per second, which is more than Bitcoin's doing right now, and is partly because of the floating block size that's in Ethereum. But it's important to note this 20 transaction per second limit was not a limit, in fact, but only the maximum that we could find people to spam the network. And if we'd found more spammers, we maybe would have seen a higher number than 20. But right now, that's the highest we've ever seen. There's about 5,000 nodes, 150,000 accounts, and including the 3 meetups here today, there's over 200 meetups with 40,000 people involved in Ethereum, Bitcoin, blockchain, something of that nature. So it's growing quite rapidly, I think. Here's some more kind of stat dashboards, community charts and graphs and chain explorers, just like you would expect to see in Bitcoin land. There's a few different ones out there, and some of them have some really cool things to look at. The charts here are pretty old. I screenshotted, but the stats I just gave you were updated pretty recently. And the website with all the dApps is on Ethercast. It kind of looks like this. It lists about 200 now. Some of those are production out there running. Some are only being researched. There's a whole variety of statuses, but people are working on lots of different things. Twitter clones, forum clones, dice games, KYC. There's lots of stuff in development and lots of stuff not even listed there. So if you want a little bit more information, I would encourage you to take a look at ethereum.org. It has lots of tutorials, getting started links, downloads, etc. there. If you're a developer or have specific technical questions, you can find the Stack Exchange site. There's the Ethereum site just kind of finished its beta period and is quite active. There's lots of great questions on there. If you're a Redditor, there's a subreddit that's very active. And then a couple of those sites that I listed in screenshots, eatstats.net is the kind of really pretty black neon dashboard. Etherchain and Etherscan are both blockchain explorers. And then dapps.ethercast.com is that last link there. So that's kind of like a snapshot of where I see decentralization and the benefits right now. It's at the stage very early that we have to start building some of these systems that we want to exist. So some of the things I'm very interested in talking about is where we can move blockchain just beyond value, beyond smart contracts, and really start making a huge impact in the day-to-day lives of us as people living in our communities and our states and all of our tribes effectively. How can we apply blockchains to help coordinate our actions better? And then by understanding what blockchains do best, we can actually get there and do that. So yeah, that's kind of my blockchains 101. I have some more information on Ethereum. It's kind of past, present, future if you guys are interested in hearing more about where that's going, or we can take some questions now about kind of the second half of what I presented, if you'd like.
More Ethereum presentation or pass? Yeah. We like it all.
Are there any questions on some of the stuff I presented towards the end? I'm happy to take those before I switch over to some Ethereum info.
Okay, so we'll do a few questions here, and I'll try and repeat them so that the YouTubes can hear, you can hear, and everybody else can hear. Go ahead, Sean.
All right. So she's a bit.
Let me.
So can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm curious a little bit about the education of Ethereum to general developers outside of the niche of the Bitcoin space, because we're talking about like crypto state machines here, and that's a pretty new concept in data structures. Like, how do you communicate that to general audience rather than just us?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think that at some point we have to recognize that the average person will not know that blockchains underlie their applications or whatever they're using. Just as every person that owns a car doesn't understand how a combustion engine works at its core. So I think we're at the stage where we're having to spread that education to the developers, but not at the end of the day, not everybody's going to need to know what Merkle data trees are. I think as long as we understand, oh, okay, blockchains are really good coordination mechanisms. They solve this important, long-standing problem. So if I need some way to coordinate, how do I want to do that? I have certain pros and cons to a central server, right? It can be very efficient and fast, but it leaves something to be desired in terms of transparency. And that's where blockchains can really bring some extra added value. They might not be quite as fast as centralized servers in some cases, but they're far more resilient for many other use cases.
Yeah, so kind of stole my thunder with that question, so I'm going to sort of switch mine up a little bit. So yeah, I'm curious about any concrete steps you guys might have on developer outreach. So let me give you some context to this question. I mean, I feel like if you look at any platform, they're really only as good as sort of the applications that exist on them. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, whether or not they're going to see adoption. And, you know, when I look around the community, the analogy I like to use is you see a lot of Woz's, but you don't see a lot of Steve Jobs. And I think that's, you know, there's such a learning curve to it, even to developers who are knowledgeable in the space. Yeah. It's a lot to take in. So I'm curious, are you guys thinking about any sort of concrete plans or steps to try to really market the platform to developers and sort of unleash it on them so they can maybe build the killer app that really takes Ethereum to the next level?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. I think that probably we do need to put more concerted effort into education of developers about blockchains in general. This is something I've specifically been kind of focused on lately. I traveled to Shanghai twice earlier this year to work first on a hackathon and then actually providing training content for the Chinese developers over there. It's a bit hard, I think, with the whole Ethereum Foundation kind of being the central entity that helps push the community forward in certain protocol aspects. The question of where the delegation of responsibility falls is a tough one. But I think that if a community sees the foundation as a tool to say, hey, let's use this as a mechanism to get out and reach out to specific developer conferences or different types of industries to spread the knowledge, that could be a very positive thing. One good thing that has kind of come out recently is the foundation has spun out the documentation effort to the community for the software. So previously, myself included as part of the developers, we're putting together documentation for our Frontier release and then our Homestead release. And now we've kind of pushed that out even further to the community. So if you want general Ethereum information as a developer, you can just go to ethdocs.org. And it's constantly under construction, but as more people get more information, they're adding it there. I would love to see more of an effort in explaining blockchain benefits and decentralization benefits to average developers. I go to the Orlando Dev Meetup here in Florida. And when I talk about blockchains and Ethereum and Bitcoin, most of them have no idea actually. So sometimes I realize I'm living in this blockchain bubble. And we definitely need to kind of explain to common developers, why are these systems beneficial and important, and why should they be interested in exploring them more?
Yeah, I mean, if I could just follow up, I think you hit on it with the blockchain bubble. That's kind of what I was getting at with my analogy. You have a lot of people, who are in the community who are really, really knowledgeable in these very esoteric subjects. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there is a lack of human resources who have the ability to translate these concepts and to sort of give the value add to people who may not be as much of a true believer as the guys who are building this.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think perhaps that was similarly a problem for PGP when it was first introduced. No one could get the experience just right to make it, usable for an average person. And I feel very beneficial actually working with the Ethereum team. Everybody on that team does care about the user interface and user experience. And they understand that if you don't provide a polished experience, the kind of experience that Apple strives for, most people are not going to use the technology for technology's sake. And for us to really move this beyond a bubble and move it into the global consciousness, we've got to do a really good job on pushing it out to developers so that they pick up the slack, and also bringing on the designers on board and the marketers and branders to kind of explain, hey, we should all be interested in this because we're tired of being spied on by the NSA. We want privacy. We're tired of our data being hacked by large corporations and, getting spammed messages all the time, right? We don't want to have to worry about these things. And the internet was built on 1970s technology. And that's why we have kind of this half broken structure. But now we have technology to improve it and make it better. And this is an opportunity to rebuild and re-strengthen some pieces of the internet that are prone to problems right now.
I wanted to follow on with a question with what you were saying with the applications being what really will make or break it in the end. And beyond just privacy, do you see any dApps that are coming out that you're really excited about that you think will be the first killer app?
So I don't know if there will ever be a killer app, but I definitely see the space moving faster than even I anticipated. Because I work and look at blockchains every day, I get a little frustrated that things don't move fast enough sometimes. But when I take a step back, there's new news coming out pretty much every week. So there's been a lot of kind of crowd token sales going on. One of those that's somewhat well known as Slockit, who has, their organization is going to be tying the real world, a lock or a power plug or something to an on-blockchain solution. And there's a lot of interest in this. And I think this is especially an area that is going to have the most growth in this industry is providing this on and off ramp between virtual and physical. So Slockit's one area that people are a lot of interest in. Digix just recently had a crowd sale for their token, which will allow them to provide a collateralized token asset on blockchain. Basically a gold token. That was, I think they got $5.5 million in less than 24 hours for their sale. And all of these people are kind of working towards similar problems, which is how do we have the community be the stewards of this project so that there is that kind of explosive growth and buy-in and people feel that they have a reason to want to continue pushing this out. And that keeps pointing to this idea of a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. And when you extend the idea of blockchains and value transfer to smart contracts, you start building on more complex smart contracts, you actually can build a whole back office system or a whole administrative system and replace some of the common menial tasks that people are doing, just copying paper into different folders and faxing it and handing it off to people. It's like a really crazy thing we do today in 2016. We should use technology like BitTorrent and IPFS and blockchain to coordinate that and make that whole process simpler, faster, and easier. So from a business side, I think that's the killer app that businesses are going to attack are these efficiency gains. And then for the consumer side, I think that as this kind of creeps in, we'll start to see blockchains powering more and more of our platforms. And hopefully one day, rather than some CEOs and early employees being the kind of stockholders that get rich, it should be the community and the people who are participating in that ecosystem on an active basis who are rewarded for the efforts of growing the community. I think it's not a very hard idea to transplant from public offerings or something, right? You want the organization to grow. So we should all be rewarded for that.
Cool. Are there any other questions before we continue on? Let me get some new people here. Go ahead.
Bitcoin in the past couple of months has reached a period of somewhat general price stability, whereas I think Ether is still, since it's relatively new, hasn't reached that same level of stability.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that'll be an issue for companies deciding to develop apps based on Bitcoin blockchain versus Ethereum.
Yeah, so for anybody who's on the live stream that couldn't hear that clearly, the question is about the stability of the token price, Bitcoin versus Ether. I think that actually in the end, this is something that won't matter so much. Although maybe the price of oil fluctuating might impact your driving habits. Just changing by a nickel or a dime probably is not going to change the way you drive too much. One thing that's enabled by blockchains and crypto, looking at what Digix is doing, where they're offering gold on blockchain in the form of a collateralized asset. There's no reason that you couldn't offer something similar for fiat currencies. Now, there's some specific challenges to how you maintain, an equal 1-to-1 exchange ratio in a decentralized way, but there are organizations working on that. And I think that idea of having assets on blockchain combined with the Oracle price feeds coming into the system, you can effectively get a system where you hold multiple crypto tokens. In the case of Ethereum, the way that it works is you might have a wallet with 10 or more different currencies in it, and they represent sub-tokens, but these are all separate and independent from the native token, Ether, which is used to pay for the computation on the network. So in the future, maybe you don't pay with Bitcoin or Ether directly, but you pay with whatever the merchant prefers. Maybe it's a USD token or an EUR token or whatever they want. But I think with the development of autonomous bots on blockchain, that you also won't care what token you hold. The bot will be responsible for going and seeking the best way and the cheapest price to convert from what you hold to what they want. And that's kind of the future I want. I don't want to have to worry about these things anymore. I want the computer to take care of it for me. So in the end, I don't care too much about what the price is. I think that Bitcoin has a fundamentally different value proposition than Ether or some of the other blockchains out there. But especially in the case of Ethereum, I think that something like a stable coin will eventually pop up that's independent of the native token.
Any others for now? Oh, Sean, you want to do another?
Sure. So talking about the developers again, I'm wondering if there's an angle. Developers.
We joke about Steve Ballmer's famous lines all the time.
I'm not going to jump up on that one. A way that you could take, the very, very complex concept that is Ethereum and figure out ways that you could simplify those into specific tools. I mean, like I'm working on distributed decentralized storage, and there's like already a market for that. That's already $30 billion industry. So we just take our tools and make them similar, and people already know how to use them. Versus something like Ethereum, completely different. If there's ways you could simplify it or abstract it to developers so that they could have that work somewhat like the tools that they're used to. I saw that you guys are working on an IDE, and that might be one step towards that. But I was thinking, are there other ways you could simplify the concept for developers?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of aspects to this. Explaining blockchains to the average person, and there are a couple of different kinds of average people. Yeah, so there's one average person which is the mom and dad or grandmother kind of situation. How do I make it so easy that mom can use it? And yeah, we've got a long way to go there, but I think the value to them can be very easily explained and saying, look, if you're tired of the NSA snooping on you, they're tired of having your data hacked, right? These systems allow for us to fix that. They don't have to understand how to build them. My mom's a nurse. She doesn't really know that much about computers, but she understands that there's value in having online privacy. So that's one, I think, very easy sell. Towards the developers, I think that we have an opportunity actually to simplify the administrative aspect of it all. Rather than having to deploy to a server, you can deploy your static assets to a decentralized swarm and benefit from things on BitTorrent where, in decentralized protocol, when things get popular, they get faster. And in a centralized model, when things get popular, the server gets overloaded and goes down. So I think this is one way that we can start to push towards developers to saying, this is actually easier because you don't have to worry about these things. Right now, it's a little bit harder because the decentralized storage aspect isn't tied in tightly to the whole Ethereum smart contract system. But that's going to change later this year, I think. And if you are a web developer and can just write up a web app, and then you put in your little JavaScript hooks for connecting to Ethereum blockchain, and then you just have one-click deploy button that puts it on decentralized storage. It's there forever. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Your logic lives on blockchain. Your storage is decentralized. That's your whole application right there. So you don't have to do as many things. We can actually simplify the web development experience for the average developer, I think.
We had one, this is our first Google Hangout live stream. We had one question come in from somewhere else. Somebody was saying, was asking if privacy is a big part of the value prop for Ethereum, how do you keep the antisocial, like with Bitcoin, we had all the concerns about in your presentation. Is it just for buying illegal drugs? Like, yeah. How does it grow with that kind of, or around it?
Yeah, so I think definitely Bitcoin has a stigma to overcome if it is going to survive as a social movement. This is, I think, an area that has kept also some banks and so forth away from some of this technology. Is they can't, for regulatory reasons, have a system that is anonymous. They need to be able to track stuff. Like it or not, that's just the way the banks and the regulations are crafted. So they're not going to touch blockchains if they don't have some sort of transparency aspect. And someone deep inside Ethereum who's talked to a lot of organizations, I think I see this again and again and again, that this transparency aspect really turns people on in a way that the privacy aspect, the pseudonymous nature of Bitcoin, may have given them some questionable feelings. So yeah, privacy in terms of data privacy on blockchain is a huge problem right now. And it's something that we should hopefully solve because it allows for so much many cooler applications. I would love to bring blockchains to the medical industry rather than having a paper file at my doctor that he controls, and if I hand it off to a new doctor, he's got to hand it off to the new person, and who owns the records, and I only see them occasionally. This is not the kind of system I want. I also don't want the system where my data is owned by Facebook or Twitter or some other company. I want a system where I own the data. So if we can actually accomplish privacy on blockchain, we can maybe move medical records to a system where it's online encrypted, and I can individually hand out and revoke keys for subsets of that data, right? So my dentist doesn't need my entire medical record. They only need information about, my mouth and face area. So I think we actually have some opportunities for efficiency if we can solve some of these scalability and privacy issues that are outstanding for blockchains as a whole, not just Ethereum or Bitcoin.
Very cool. Any other questions?
Hey, Taylor, earlier we had a Hyperledger question.
Yeah.
Just curious, are you going to cover that in like your next little past, present, future, or did you want
No, you can crack at it now if you'd like.
Okay, yeah.
So I'll just start off in saying I don't actually know all that much about Hyperledger.
Moving on.
Yeah, I sent an email to inquire more, like on behalf of the foundation, like, hey, there's a consortium of blockchain companies. Maybe some of them wants to invite us to the table. Yeah, I didn't really get too far, and I have no idea what they're working on. We kind of jokingly made a pull request on April Fool's Day to pull request in an Ethereum client saying, here's some working code, but they closed that very promptly. So I don't know what they're working on. If anybody has an idea, they can tell me, and I'll give you my thoughts on it. But has anybody heard anything?
Do you want to follow up on that?
It's just a bunch of big enterprise companies working on essentially what we call distribution chains. So I think IBM and Microsoft, I happen to be on that's why.
Oh.
I prefer the idea of Ethereum and transparency that they talked about here. So I'm trying to look for ammunition.
Did you hear that, Taylor?
No, that was a little hard to hear.
He's saying it's the consortium that you mentioned earlier. It's the IBMs and the Microsofts getting together to do blockchain stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I know that much, but I have no idea in terms of what is their ultimate goal that they're trying to accomplish. Okay, they're trying to do some sort of combined Bitcoin or combined blockchain project, but I think that it's so hard to define the technology now. Can you really define an abstracted version of that meets all needs? I don't know.
Go ahead.
Taylor, Atomic Mind. One thing I've been noticing in the news, I'm not really a tech guy, I'm more of a marketing guy. I've got a TV show that's going to be on Bitcoin, it's going to be on Grant Carden's TV network, and it's called thecoinprofit.com. Excited about it. We're going to be doing a weekly show. Definitely want to get Ethereum on there if we want to talk about what you're doing. We're seeing a big thrust. I've worked with businesses. I've helped over 4,000 businesses accept Bitcoin in the last 12 months using BitPay and other services. And my focus is on, how can we take solutions? I hear a lot of tech talk here, and I know that's what this event is about, and I'm learning a lot. But how can we help the other 6 billion unbanked people be able to transfer value. I mean, we saw that 60-minute special on M-Pesa. That's like my #1 marketing tool. That's what gets businesses turned on about what we're doing. It's not as much about the privacy or the transparency or the stuff that came along with Bitcoin. I had my first Bitcoin transaction in 2011. My wife thought I threw away $500, and I almost did, but I found the computer. I had to get the passwords unlocked and buy a new battery to get my coins off of it. But you know, what's Ethereum going to do in the unbanked community? 6 billion people unbanked around the world, and 74% of the people in the United States distrust and dislike banks, according to a Gallup poll. Where's the solution for people to be able to transfer value with Ethereum?
Yeah. So thank you for that. I think it's a very important topic, actually. And you know, personally, I believe in the technology being able to go beyond the banking aspect of it, beyond the fintech. And while I acknowledge that there is an important need for everybody on Earth to have access to these tools, I think that we have a huge problem if we look at, especially Africa, you know, does not have access to the kinds of tools and services that we would expect, and especially in terms of governance, right? And I think this is where kind of the whole money thing ties in a little bit, is the governance is not to their needs. Either they're living in a society where there's a dictator that's not providing the services the country needs, or there are other systemic issues where they don't have access to the kind of technology and tools that they need. So I think that smart contracts, things like DAOs, transparent governance systems will allow people to use that even within their local village, and perhaps using this mesh technology to kind of have a connectivity fiber between their communities. And if, you know, finance is part of that, that's great. I'm happy to see people have access to new technology and tools, whether that's Bitcoin or a sub token. It doesn't matter to me. What I want is, you know, every person on Earth, the 7 billion plus, to have access to these tools for nearly free. You know, the internet has brought costs of things down very, very low, and everybody should have access to that. And if people in Africa are using cell phones, and if we can get internet access to most people there, I think we can actually reach out and work with all of the people on Earth with this technology, even though right now, you know, we do have certainly a concentration in the Western world and a bit in China and Asia. So yeah, I think that there's lots of opportunities. I think that finance is one big one. Personally, I would love to bring governance tools to the people so that they can build a better society for them.
So maybe we could go on to your past and future and then come back for any final questions?
Yeah, sure.
Is that good, everybody? All right.
I can, it won't take too long. I can skip some of the past stuff since we talked about blockchains here. Let me just find my slides. But I can definitely talk about some of Ethereum's proposals for scalability and efficiency and kind of what they want to achieve in the coming months and years here. Let's see. Okay. And just gotta find my screen sharing. Okay. So, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I put together this slide deck for the Zurich Meetup last week when I was there. And I talk a little bit about Bitcoin's past, talk about some of the problems we had, go over some of my history with the project. Was in Milan where I met Mihai Alisi, and that's how I originally met Vitalik Buterin, since they had started Bitcoin Magazine together. Here was the response when Vitalik announced Ethereum in Miami in January of 2014. And here is a picture of the people staying in the house. You can see some of the Ethereum founders there, including myself. So talk about real quick, just some of the technology that we've worked on so far. Since that time in January of 2014, you know, it's been almost 2 years now. We've had about 10 proof of concepts. These were released throughout the years, and they were all just testing a few aspects of this generalized state transition machine. They weren't completed, and a lot of the work would have to be done later to actually finish these concepts. But it all culminated in this Olympic testnet, which was proof of concept 10. And that was activated in 2015. So almost just about a year after everything kind of got it spinning up. And we had a DevCon 1, a DevCon 0 conference. You can see the group here is a little bit larger than the first photo. The more recent things that we've worked on were the releases of Frontier and Homestead, if you've heard about any of these. So Frontier was the main public network. We considered it beta, use at your own risk. And that was activated about 4.5 months after Olympic. It was based on the Olympic block number that was a palindromic prime. So it was a number that was prime and also the same forward and backward. We're really nerdy that way. So we like picking fun numbers. So that when that came, the community basically started mining on this new Genesis block that originated from the Olympic network, and that's more or less how the Ethereum public network was born. And then after about another 7.5 months, we recently released Homestead, which we transitioned the network to stable state. You know, we consider general usability for developers to start deploying their applications on. And we integrated some protocol changes that were discussed at DevCon 1 in London. And then now we're looking forward to a couple of more major releases that were outlined a couple of years ago. One is Metropolis, which is this improved GUI experience. So the Mist browser and Mix IDE will be more polished and finished, hopefully, when we release this. And then Serenity, which will have scalability and beyond. These were kind of our original goals, but that's changing now as the research is allowing some faster development in certain areas. So this was the picture from DevCon 1 in London. Again, the group's growing. It actually won't even fit on the slide. I have to like pull out a little bit. So I showed you this slide before. Basically, the thing that I'm trying to communicate to people, if you go look at the charts on the various sites, everything's moving up. People are interested in blockchains. People are interested in smart contracts. People are interested in DAOs. Right now, we have a Geth 1.4 feature update coming. It's release candidate 1. Geth is the main client the foundation supports, in addition to the C++ and Python clients. There will be some incremental improvements to the wallet, one of which is the fast sync-like client. So instead of syncing the network for 3 days, you can hopefully sync to the network in about an hour. And we're going to be continuing to expand the builds. Right now, we support Windows, Mac, and Linux, but there's provisional work towards Android, iOS, ARM builds for running on Raspberry Pi or embedded devices. So we're going to keep working on that to expand that. So on the horizon, we actually have a few protocol improvements that are coming out. One of the areas that Ethereum has had some difficulty with, if you've ever worked with maybe Shapeshift or Kraken or some of the different exchanges, sometimes they have difficulty processing Ethereum transactions because they are not using Ethereum in the smart contract way. They're using it in the track balance way. And we didn't necessarily expect this, but we see the problem of that pattern. So one of the things that's going to happen sooner rather than later is condensing these distinctions between a human-owned account and a blockchain autonomous contract is by condensing them into the same type and kind of changing a little bit of the fundamentals of how transactions are initiated within the system. This will allow us to move some of the security mechanisms into the Ethereum virtual machine and lays the groundwork for proof of stake, which I'll talk about shortly here. So some more client improvements coming down the line are improved light client functionality, improved state tree pruning. So right now when you have a node, you retain the prior state versions of all blocks passed, and that's kind of wasteful. Takes up about 15 gigs on my laptop right now. Another thing is NatSpec, natural language prompts. So instead of just sending a transaction to some address for some value, maybe there could be a more human aspect to that. It can explain what the transaction is for, and then it can be localized. So, you know, again, spreading this technology out to people, if we concentrated on one language, we're missing, you know, speakers of all other languages. So this, I think, is really useful. The other tenants are Swarm and Whisper. These are the storage and messaging components of the Ethereum World Computer Vision. And we'll have some dev tool improvements coming down the line to make it easier to prove that the smart contract does what you expect it to do. Yeah, I went to Shanghai to train some of the people there. Definitely language barrier is an issue. They have a dedicated Chinese language forum called Ethans, and I think that's far more popular within the Chinese community than Reddit or the English language forums, just because it's easier for people to read. So I think we definitely have to do a lot of work in communicating to speakers who don't understand English or are in different parts of the world that don't have access to all the first world tools. So yeah, I'm going to skip over this next section of opportunities. We talked about privacy. We talked a little bit about efficiency. Bitcoin started with 600 seconds. Litecoin went down to a quarter of that. We're now down to about 15 seconds on Ethereum. And with Casper and Proof of Stake, they're really trying to push things down to under 5 seconds, maybe under 2 or 1 seconds. And that is actually part of the scalability solution, is moving to proof of stake. Will allow for the chain to scale up in a number of ways, faster transactions, faster to finality, and allow for nodes to not have to host the entire blockchain and have to process every transaction. So we're going to roll it out in 2 or 3 different phases. These are the kind of the details of that. First, proof of stake will be rolled out and vote, and proof of work will kind of be the main algorithm, and we'll start to transition some of the virtual machine improvements in. And then as time goes on, we'll kind of swap those out so that proof of stake takes a greater role, proof of work takes a slightly lesser role, and all the while hopefully increasing the scalability with sharding, lowering the block time, introducing new opcodes for new functionality. One of those examples is the Hawk opcode, as it's known. And this is for some of the zero knowledge proofs, the ZK snarks as they're called. So it could be that we get some sort of privacy built into Ethereum sooner rather than later, and you could access that just through your Web3 JavaScript library. So no major protocol changes necessarily. And I think that's pretty much it. The only other thing I'll mention is if you're really interested in blockchains or Ethereum, there is an event planned in Shanghai later this year, DevCon 2. Hopefully it will be bigger and better than all the others prior, and I'd love to get a huge photo with everybody, anybody who happens to attend. But this is kind of a glimpse at what's in process for Ethereum, what we've accomplished so far, and kind of why we've approached it this way. It's not due to any kind of dislike for Bitcoin or other projects in the ecosystem. It's simply because we wanted to build something that wasn't yet possible, and we wanted to make it possible. So we just did.
Okay, maybe we can thank Taylor for take a few more questions. We're about at an hour here. Go ahead.
Hey, Taylor, thanks a lot for your time. I'm one of the co-founders of Storage, and currently our cryptocurrency is based on the counterparty protocol. As you may have heard, there's a lot of disarray within that community, and I was wondering if there's been any convergence from counterparty to Ethereum, because it's one of the things that we'd like to consider.
Yeah. I haven't paid a lot of attention to counterparty other than maybe some marketing stunts at claiming EVM integration or something. So I don't know a whole lot about it, and I haven't been following the community tightly. Is there a certain aspect of it that you were interested in? Maybe some compatibility between them, or smart contracts in general?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're looking at is micropayments. And I understand all the opcodes around that, and the new opcodes being worked with Bitcoin, like check sequence verified, but it's like, I am not sure if that's even possible with Ethereum as it stands now. How would you do that?
Yes, there's a little quiet, but I think you were asking about microtransactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how we do that in Ethereum.
Yeah, so there hasn't been any special attention given to microtransactions per se. Ethereum, unlike Bitcoin, has a secondary kind of conversion rate that's used internally to pay for operations. And this allows the fee for operations, such as sending value, to float differently from the external price of the native token, right? So what this means is even though Ether might be $1 or $10 or whatever, the actual fee paid on the gas can float separately. So while it's not a perfect mechanism, and I think there are ways to improve it, I think that it will allow us to decouple the price so that we can actually have low cost transactions floating on the chain. And maybe there will be some components of Whisper there where you pay lower fees for messages that take longer to propagate or sit around longer or something of that nature. There's definitely a lot of possibilities for sure.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So I'm curious, you were talking about the paying for fees of transactions. If I'm not mistaken, that's weak, correct?
So the base unit of Ether is Wei.
Right.
It's similar to a Satoshi, but there's an extra concept in Ethereum virtual machine, gas. This is the quote fuel that's used. So the analogy I try to explain to people is, if this is a fuel and you're powering a car, right, you need to put some fuel in your car tank before you go on a trip. And the amount of fuel you're going to fill up in your car, it's going to depend on how far you're going, the type of trip you plan to go on, right? And if you're, let's say, coasting forward on a flat road the entire time, the amount of fuel you consume is going to be at a very standard rate. But if you're climbing mountains the whole time, then the amount of fuel you consume is going to increase. So in the same way, in the virtual machine in Ethereum, there are flat roads and there are up roads. You know, addition might cost 1 unit, whereas multiplication might cost 3 units. And this is where the whole gas notion comes from. So just like in Bitcoin, where miners can mine it and accept transactions at any price they want, similarly can they in Ethereum. So if you submit a transaction for a certain price, they can pick it up or not pick it up. And this is akin to kind of shopping around for gas on your way out of town. You see a few different gas stations and you decide one to use. It doesn't work exactly the same in crypto, which is why I think there's some rough edges around fees that both Bitcoin and Ethereum might suffer from. But some of the mechanisms were a little bit different, seeing the problems that Bitcoin kind of suffered from. So hopefully if we keep everything in balance, we can still have microtransactions going on while also people use maybe value mechanisms as sub-tokens on the platform.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead, over here.
You have to come closer.
If you want, you can use the mic. You're not really
Yeah.
So if you're using Ethereum as like a virtual machine and it's not just a ledger of payment transactions, how do you know when it's safe to prune nodes from the Merkle tree to make the client slider?
Yeah, there are specific ways to do that, and I'm not well versed in the technical implementations of those. But in a general sense, the blockchain is processed over 1 million blocks now. I can guarantee you I do not need the state at block 0. I probably don't need the state from the last 1 million blocks. And probably I only need the state from the first or for the last few thousand blocks at most. One way to get around this is with some of the light client features that are being developed. And I think why it's taking a little bit longer than we hoped is that we want to get it right so that actually light client isn't just one type of client, but actually is a different kind of hybrid beast that it can be a light client to serve different sorts of purposes. And what I mean by that is a light client that can access the different subsets and the sub-object parts of this blockchain component, right? So there are blocks, there are transactions, we have transaction receipts. The block header is separate from the block body. If the light client protocol and the light clients themselves are cognizant of all these objects, they could prune pretty much all of their data. And then if a request comes in for an old state or some data it doesn't have, hopefully at that point, the protocol will be sufficiently advanced that the client can just kind of go seek that information from some of its peers. And maybe it does it from a couple of peers to compare them and make sure the data is valid. This definitely differs from the model that clients like Electrum use. Some of the things like Bloom filters can be used still, but I think because of the UTXO model that Bitcoin uses and how that differs from the account state transition model that Ethereum uses, fundamentally the light client model is going to be a little bit different.
Okay, maybe one or two more questions with Mike. I can repeat it too. You don't have to.
Hey, just to let you know, if people want to ask us, we do have time.
Okay.
Yeah, my question was about, I'm very comfortable with proof of work, but I am much more skeptical on proof of stake, because proof of work, if 51% attack happens, there's only a limited amount of things you can do with that. But in a proof of stake world, you pretty much have freedom to mutate the blockchain in whatever way you see fit. Granted, it's a lot harder to gather 51% of the stake, but it could happen. So how do you propose to address that concern as a vector of attack in Ethereum once you transition to proof of stake?
Yeah. So the question is about proof of work versus proof of stake and some of the security concerns around that. I think that I tend to agree with Vitalik's recent blog post that proof of stake and probably proof of work can both be described as a consensus by bet system. And some parallels can be drawn between the economic security that a mining rig provides you in a proof of work environment versus a bonded value in a proof of stake system. I think one of the original complaints of or criticisms of proof of stake was the problem with proof of stake is there's nothing at stake. Well, that kind of problem can be solved in a way if you bond the money on the chain for a long time. You know, if there's a penalty for being wrong and you have to commit that money for 3 or 4 months, then you have much less of a chance of having these kind of problems with proof of stake, with a takeover. In a general sense, proof of stake is like proof of work, but it's virtualized. There are some key differences, but the value of proof of work, in my opinion, comes from the value of 2 spots. One is the capital expenditure that's invested into the actual mining hardware. Today, lots of millions of dollars are poured into ASIC chips. And then you have the ongoing expense of the energy each month. And some places have some advantages with this, with low cost or basically free mining. In a proof of stake system, you still have the capital expenditure, right? You still have the upfront investment of the amount you're going to bond to the validation process. But you don't have this ongoing energy expenditure. It does change the economics a little bit. I think it also improves the environmental aspect a little bit. But you know, there are a couple of things that I think proof of stake can actually enable that we don't have with proof of work. And the one caveat I'll say is that we probably could not have gotten to proof of stake without bootstrapping with proof of work. I don't think proof of work's bad. I just think that it's a system that can be improved upon. Like coal burning is not the best system. We have other options for generating energy. So one of those is basically this faster time to finality. Instead of having to wait for 6 confirmations on Bitcoin because, let's say, you know, there's a certain market capitalization or certain amount of economic security on all the hardware, after 6 blocks, you have millions of dollars or billions of dollars of security. That's fine for most things, but if you only need to transfer a cup of coffee, you probably only need about $5 or $10 of economic security. So in a consensus by bet system, in a system where the validators are all betting together on the block they think is going to be the truth, you can more or less wait however long you want. If you're buying a cup of coffee, you can wait 1 to 2 seconds when a block comes in. If you're buying a car, maybe you want to wait for 5 minutes. If you're buying a house, maybe you want to wait for a day. But this is, instead of a stepped system, it's going to be a completely variable kind of system where the economic value builds up over time. And one other important thing I like to highlight is that in a proof of work system, It's a lottery system right now. You get one validator who gets a lucky hash number, and then they can announce that block and be rewarded. But in a proof of stake system, you can actually have dozens or hundreds of validators all betting together, saying that we all agree, and it's all in our economic interest, that this will be the correct block. And if we're wrong, we lose the amount of money that we bonded. So this is fundamentally different economics than I think the miners are evaluating, but I think there are some benefits to this that we'll see bear out in the future.
You're getting a rebuttal. Just to follow up that. So my issue is not that proof of stake is harder to trick than proof of work. My issue is if you somehow manage it and you create a Sybil attack with enough nodes in the environment, you can actually change the history, because you don't, unlike proof of work, you have to have enough hashing power to go back into the past and mutate it and then follow it forward into the future. So you're racing the network. But with proof of stake, that's not an issue. So if you were to gather enough Ethereum nodes that you could create your own alternate history and you have enough stake, you could effectively change the entire, history as far back as you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that argument is basically the argument of what is the truth, right? I mean, we're talking about 51%. So in any scenario, if you have an overwhelming majority that disagrees, they can manufacture their own truth.
Right, but with proof of work, they can only manufacture their truth for the next block. They cannot change anything in the past. That's what I don't like about proof of stake. You could, at one point, literally change the entire history of Ethereum.
Yeah, I don't know that that's the case exactly, but I'm also, I have not been sticking to the research channel and the latest developments. So if you want to take it offline, I'm happy to research it. Yeah.
Sean, let me, or did you want to make a comment? Okay.
Just a good question. It's a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake one, right?
No, or they're going to mail all together.
Okay, we're discussing here, but let me take, you had a question back there? We'll let you know the answer.
Contentious issue.
Okay, speaking as a dev of 30 years, and I have a pretty good grasp of Bitcoin and the whole, my in particular curiosity about this is actually using the blockchain as a true verification and a voter type scenario. It's not about money. It's about a unchangeable database, only transactions, all that. I think a lot of this, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing here is you have some great technical people. That's great, but it's going to certainly outcast a lot of people that are not technical if you stay on this sort of path. I do think the blockchain is a great solution for having a true unchangeable database that basically everybody has. And that's actually why I was curious about this, because my interest is not about money. It's more about verification and voter, making voting easier and more reliable. But sometimes I think people are getting tied down to the technical aspects. Even I understand the basics of what this guy is talking about, but that's another problem. That's a whole other problem that I think you have to gain the trust of the public to think that why is this database unhackable and explain that. I've looked at the website. I've looked at the applications. I've looked at the code and everything, and I see that a lot of it it seems to be like C or C++ and such. But I don't really see that many tutorials or step-by-steps or anything that would really engage the public in general to say, hey, this is a workable thing. So back to my core question. I'm sorry, I'm sort of ranting or whatever. But is there any plans with your company, with this company, to make it more publicly accessible and easier, because it shouldn't just be something just for devs. I have a big thing against technical arrogance, which I've been doing dev since I was 13, man. And I have to push back all the time. People, there's a lot of assumption, a lot of technical assumption here. And I'm thinking the real case to adoption is to get people to easily adopt it. So are you approaching that idea? Are you really trying to engage non-developers, trying to engage people that would like say, hey, I want a turnkey voting system that's secure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to your point about spreading the message and adoption, you're absolutely right. There has to be a concentrated effort to explain the value of these systems to people in a way that really impacts them, that they understand in their personal life. And I think it's a slow growth process. You know, we were starting with the blockchain ideologists in the future, and now we're starting to move out more into the developer aspect, especially with lots of interest from enterprises and large corporations and getting their developers on board. And I think that once the average developer understands the cases and the reasons to use blockchain, we can actually step into a larger kind of global consciousness of, oh, well, we have this blockchain thing. I understand it gives me transparency and so forth. Can actually use this in my community or in my school district or whatever kind of governance situation you want. For me, the whole governance aspect is big. Maybe Bitcoin will never replace the entire financial system. Maybe smart contracts will never replace our entire government. But if we can impact people in certain specific areas where they want this, where they desire for this transparency, then I think that's where we really can connect with people.
I'm sorry, I kind of went off the rails here, but the I guess final question is like, certainly I hope that you're going to share a slide share or something like that, your slides tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have them on my website. I can pass a link around. I don't have them on SlideShare. I'm not familiar with it.
If you could just throw it onto the meetup.com
Yeah, we'll
link,
put it there.
that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, maybe.
I have a burning question.
Okay.
It kind of follows what he was saying a little bit about voting. I'm very interested in authentication and voting and things of this nature. How do you see Ethereum and what's going on right now and what will be going on in the future? How is this possible to do a decentralized voting system? And are we going to see a real true design of this being a fully public one, or maybe this is a consortium or a private one? I mean, I hope not, but
yeah.
What do we really see? How is this possible, and what does it look like as far as voting, especially with the elections coming up and everything?
Yeah, so voting is definitely an interesting area. There are a few specific problems, I think, that private companies are probably going to have to attack and polish before voting on blockchain can happen. And one of the big areas is key management. As humans, we're really bad at this whole key management aspect. I've helped manage several crypto wallets and multi-sig wallets, and the weak link is never the technology, it is always the human. So getting a system where there's key management in place, where the user actually owns their own private key, I think is going to be important. The second part is, how do you do that in a way so that the user cannot be identified, right? This is very important for blockchains. For transparent operation of voting. And then the other aspect is, how do you make it so that the user cannot be coerced or forced into revealing their vote? This is like a higher bar to achieve. I think the first two things, key management and the first step at privacy on blockchain, would be a huge step forward over the Diebold machine disaster that we've seen in the past. I'm very passionate about the governance stuff, and I would love to provide hardware solutions that enable for smart contract, verifiable, transparent blockchain voting solutions. I think that would be huge for anyone in America to Africa.
Okay. Hey, just a quick follow-up. How do you ensure people don't vote twice, especially with a public kind of system like that?
Yeah, so I mean, the government still is going to have to probably manage the real-world virtual aspect. it was, I think Consensus in New York has a proof of address Oracle. So you can pay them $5 worth of Ether. They'll send you a postcard to your address with a special key on it. You enter that onto a website, and you can effectively prove that you can receive mail at that address. So, you know, governments maintain voter rolls. I think if they maintain a voter roll and you just tell them what key you're going to be voting with, or some way to do that without actually telling them the key, I think that would be the ideal. We're not going to abolish the entire, you know, election system with blockchains right away, unfortunately.
Proof of work.
Yeah.
All right. I think we should wrap it up here. Thanks again so much, Taylor.
Thank you, everyone. It was had a great time. Enjoy.
All right.
Bye-bye.
I'm hitting stop.